With Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Serbia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and I request the Protocol Officer to escort him to his seat at the Council table. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Caroline Ziade, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite Mr. Albin Kurti to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw to the attention of Council members to the document S/2024/134, a letter dated 5th February 2024 from the Permanent Representative of Serbia to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to Ms. Caroline Ziade. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw to the attention of Council members to the document S/2024/134, a letter dated 5th February 2024 from the Permanent Representative of Serbia to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to Ms. Caroline.
President, distinguished members of the Security Council, distinguished representatives, let me start by thanking you, Madam President, for this opportunity to brief the Council on the latest unfolding developments in Kosovo. Almost 1 year ago, 2 agreements were reached in Brussels on 27th of February and in Ohrid on 18th of March, setting forth a pathway toward negotiations and mutual engagement. However, with disagreement on the sequencing of the implementation, progress was stalled. Subsequent developments, such as the by-elections in 4 municipalities in northern Kosovo, resulting in mayors elected by barely 3.47% of eligible voters, the ensuing clashes around those municipality buildings on the 29th of May that resulted in significant injuries to civilians and to 93 KFOR personnel, and the serious security incident in Banjska on the 24th of September, still under investigation, that led to fatalities, were serious setbacks. Despite some positive momentum that re-emerged at the end of last year, with progress achieved over vehicle license plates, the energy roadmap, customs documentation, and the participation of the Kosovo Serbs in the initiation of the referendum to recall the mayors, unilateral actions on issues that clearly fall within the political dialogue process and its governing agreements are cause for great concern. Regardless which side takes them and what justifications are provided, and in the absence of unambiguous public communications, such actions predictably exacerbate an environment of insecurity and mistrust. Madam President, recently, on the 27th of December 2023, the Central Board of Kosovo adopted a regulation and announced that as of 1st of February 2024, the only currency allowed for cash transactions in Kosovo will be the euro. Limited public explanation was offered, despite the fact that since 1999, the dinar has served as the de facto primary currency for cash and commercial transactions in Kosovo's served majority areas. Tens of thousands of individuals are affected, as is the economy, which depends upon their purchasing power. More specifically, the regulation interrupts the payment to individuals employed by Serbian-funded institutions in Kosovo, certain agricultural and social welfare subsidies, and recipients of pensions, small and medium-scale businesses, health and education services, including childcare, will also be severely affected, as they have for long also used to receive their funds from Serbia. This decision, particularly as related to the short deadline of its entry into force and the affected individuals' future access to basic economic and social services, became a matter of concern for local communities and international interlocutors. Subsequently, and in response to the obvious concerns this has raised, the Kosovo authorities on the 6th of February announced a transitional period of 1 month for implementation, accompanied by a communications campaign. Yet, not all concerns seems to be addressed regarding the cash flow in dinars, as a cash transfer truck was prevented entry into Kosovo on the 7th of February, while 4 million dinars confiscated by the Kosovo police on the 3rd of February in Pejapeć municipality still awaits judicial and administrative actions. Madam President, as highlighted by many international partners, such issues under the Brussels Agreement in 2013 and 2015, in which the association community of Serb majority municipalities in Kosovo was decided upon. I would like to reiterate, Madam President, that actions, regardless of their legality and justification, must take into consideration their impact on affected population. Otherwise, such actions not only increase tensions, but also weaken the potential for lasting peace and security across all communities in Kosovo. In the spirit of conflict prevention, more should be done to win the hearts and minds of non-majority communities. Madam President, on 26th of January and 2nd of February, Kosovo police conducted operations targeting facilities used by the Serbian non-majority communities in the municipalities of Dragaš, Pejapeć, Kline Klina, and Istok Istok, as well as a community health center in Pristina. The Kosovo police announced that in all 4 municipal locations, various documents were seized, buildings were sealed, staff were taken into custody for questioning and later released. Also, during an earlier police operation in Pejapeć on the 2nd of January, a team of journalists from Goraž Devac, the only Kosovo Serbian media outlet in that region, reported being stopped and searched despite having presented valid press credentials. As you know, Madam President, UNMIC and our main partners place the highest importance upon ensuring the freedom of the media and the freedom of expression at all times. Madam President, neither the Central Bank of Kosovo's news regulations nor these recent Kosovo police operations have contributed to de-escalations as repeatedly called for by international interlocutors. In that regard, I cannot overstate the critical deterrent role KFOR continues to play on the ground today. Madam President, in all my statements, including the latest on the 6th of February, I reaffirm the importance of upholding the rule of law, free from political influence, and also reiterated that all related actions must be anchored in the principles of human rights. I will continue to call on both Pristina and Belgrade to engage actively and in good faith in the EU-facilitated dialogue as the venue for tackling the most sensitive policy issues that affect the communities. It is crucial that efforts towards negotiated and mutually accepted solutions do not falter. Continuous effort to build greater mutual trust and respect are the only viable path to stability, prosperity, and security. Madam President, history has repeatedly shown that just solutions do not emerge from unilateral actions, but rather from a sustained and painstaking commitment to open communication and dialogue. We will continue our efforts to encourage all stakeholders to prioritize trust and building it, not only at the grassroots level, but at all levels, including between communities and institutions. Trust develops only in an atmosphere that fosters mutual respect, open communication, fairness, and both the perception and the reality of equal treatment. In closing, let us remember again that the only acceptable path ahead is one that is grounded in dialogue and compromise, embraces human rights, and ensures the equitable application of the rule of law. I can assure you, Madam President, that UNMIC remains committed to providing good offices towards this ultimate goal. And I thank you for your attention.
I thank Ms. Ziadeh for her briefing, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alexander Vuçiqit, President of the Republic of Serbia.
Dear Madam President of the Security Council, distinguished members of the delegations, I extend my deep appreciation to the Security Council for the quick convening of this session. It has paramount importance, and it is truly necessary because of the ongoing situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, which is absolutely contrary to the UN Charter and relevant Security Council resolutions. In concrete terms, the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina have created in the respective territory the unbearable living conditions for Serbs, and they are now carrying out widespread systematic attacks against Serb civilians, as well as their persecution. Such a situation, in the absence of appropriate reaction, could cause irreparable harm to the survival of the Serbian people in Kosovo and Metohija. At a Security Council session dedicated to the 6-month UNMIC report, the Republic of Serbia regularly informs this Council and the international public of the ongoing situation, and particularly of the very difficult position of Serbian and other non-Albanian population in Kosovo and Metohija. The Republic of Serbia asked for this extraordinary session of the Security Council precisely because current events and Pristina's activities are of such nature that they can cause the irreparable harm also into period until the convening of the session that would be dedicated to the 6-month UNMIC report. Direct occasion for which we asked for this session is recent move of the so-called Kosovo Central Bank, by which payment transactions with the Serbian currency dinar is banned in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija as of 1st February. Having done this, the so-called leadership's continuous set of attacks against Serbs and other non-Albanian population in Kosovo and Metohija culminated being that their survival in the territory of southern Serbian province depends to a large extent directly on dinar assets coming first and foremost from the budget of the Republic of Serbia. data that the Republic of Serbia pays 60,946 salaries and pensions from its budget in dinars, 2,430 student tuitions, and that it finances soup kitchens that meet basic needs of approximately 2,000 socially most vulnerable citizens, illustrate that this measure is an attack, first of all against the Serbian population, and that it makes the situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija difficult. These numbers alone clearly demonstrate that the huge number of people in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija directly or indirectly depend on dinar incomes from the budget of the Republic of Serbia. Due to that, it is obvious that the ban of dinar payment transactions, i.e. decision to abolish dinar as the legal tender, deprives directly huge number of people of their basic personal means of living. Additionally, one should have in mind that around 6,794 Serbian and non-Albanian farms in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija depend directly on dinar subsidies from the Republic of Serbia, while the survival of 922 business entities owned by the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija, which are directly dependent of dinar payment transactions, is no longer operationally viable or possible. To sum up, with a decision to ban dinar payment transactions, Prishtina's regime directly disables any operation of all medical, educational, social, cultural, and other institutions that enable Serbs to provide themselves and their families with basic provisions, to have education, to get medical treatment, buy medications, and do everything that is considered to be ordinary life with a minimum of human dignity. Precisely, these institutions are the basis for establishment of the community of Serb-majority municipalities, whose competencies and structure are clearly defined in the Agreement on General Principles signed in 2015. Article 17, Item D of this agreement defines clearly that Serbia has the right to finance this CSM, among other things, education and healthcare, within this agreed institutional framework of Serb-majority municipalities in Kosovo and Metohija. Any prevention of financing Serbian schools, kindergartens, faculties, hospitals, and infirmaries is a direct blow to both survival of Serbs and to the establishment of the CSM. However, it is obvious that precisely creation of unbearable living conditions and depriving the Serbs of the possibility of survival is the only objective of the regime in Pristina, which through the respective act of structural violence intensifies years-long, well-planned and systematic attack against Serbian population, and by which open persecution of Serbs from Kosovo and Metohija has begun. In that sense, I shall disfigure with facts the complete absence of any grounds of the argumentation of the regime in Pristina, claiming that the measure to abolish dinar and introduction of euro as the only legal tender has been taken solely with the purpose of providing alleged rule of law. Please bear in mind that the so-called Kosovo Albanian leadership uses the term rule of law solely to harm Serbs and Serbian Orthodox Church. It is so widespread and drastic, usual practice, that provisional institutions of self-government have been publicly and openly denying for 8 years to deliver on final decision of their own Supreme Court on giving back the land that is owned by the Serbian Orthodox monastery Visoki Dečani. If we have in mind that this is how Pristina refers to the implementation of the principle of rule of law in case of the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage, which is under 24/7 protection of KFOR and purely Albanian inhabited environment, and which is inhabited by the Serbian Orthodox Church monks, I believe it is clear what kind of conditions ordinary Serbian population is subjected to by Pristina, and they are also the subject of the so-called declarative protection of the Pristina's alleged rule of law. In the context of Pristina's so-called rule of law that the Serbs are subjected to, allow me to mention another illustrative example. So-called judiciary, which has been massively persecuting Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija and potential Serbian returnees under the false accusations of war and other crimes, simply made the decision that member of illegal so-called Kosovo security forces Azem Kurti, who on Christmas Eve 2023 had shot from his service gun Serb child Stefan Stojanovic, 11 years old, and his cousin Miloš, 21 years old, should be released pending trial, but not to defend himself from accusation for obvious attempted murder of a child, but for an offense that is equivalent to provoking public danger, like when someone, let's say, throws firecrackers for the New Year's Eve. In that regard, one must keep in mind that this is only one out of even 470 unpunished, ethnically motivated attacks against Serbs, Serbian Orthodox Church and their property since 2021, since the so-called Kosovo-Albania leadership is led by Albin Kurti, who is now at the forefront of persecution of Serbs. Among those incidents that have begun in 2021 are also dramatic cases of endless police beating-ups and harassments of Serbs, and even brutal and unprovoked shooting at Dragiša Galjak and 4 more Serbs, which Pristina regime did not find worthy of formal investigation. Just as a comparison, for the entire 9 years prior to Kurti's coming to power in 2021, there had been totally 669 registered such ethnically motivated attacks, which is an increase of 300%. So, Pristina's regime, which in the aforementioned way creates unbearable living conditions, places Serbs outside of the law and persecutes them, claims now that the decision on abolishing legal tender dinar was made in order to implement the rule of law. Even though this factual contradiction reveals that this is not about some even formal rule of law, but solely about the mechanism for finalizing the creation of unbearable living conditions for Serbs and for their persecution. I will point out to another indisputable fact. It seems indisputable that euro was introduced in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija as the only legal tender in an obviously illegal way, because it was done by the unilateral decision of the political leadership in Pristina. It is undisputable not only due to the fact that dinar is the legal tender in the Republic of Serbia and therefore it cannot be banned in Kosovo and Metohija as the part of the territory of the Republic of Serbia, which is placed under international administration by UN Security Council Resolution 1244. This dangerous measure of the regime in Pristina was taken illegally also because euro is the legal international currency issued by the European Central Bank. Due to that, it is obvious that Pristina leadership resorted to illegal use of euro, which is said in publicly available information of the European Union and the European Central Bank, which says on its official web presentation that the so-called Kosovo quotation adopted the euro unilaterally in 2002 and have since used it as their de facto currency. This means that the euro is not legal tender there, but is treated as such by the population. Therefore, imposing the euro in this case was undeniably done not for the purpose of any rule of law, but without any legal basis and appropriate arrangements with the European Union, and only and exclusively for the purpose of completing the creation of unbearable living conditions for Serbs and their expulsion from Kosovo and Metohija. We emphasize once again that the decision to abolish the circulation of the dinar, i.e. the abolition of the dinar as a legal means of payment in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, is only one in a series of planned, well-organized, long-implemented and systematic measures of Pristina which attack the Serbian population above all and whose ultimate goal is to finally create unbearable living conditions and expel Serbs from the territory. The difficult situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, especially the position of the Serb population, drastically deteriorated after the April elections in 4 municipalities in the north of Kosovo and Metohija. After the political representatives of the majority Serb population in those municipalities, due to increased repression and political disenfranchisement, left the provisional institutions of self-government at the request of their voters, additional pressures and attacks by Pristina on the Serbian people followed. With the constant structural and physical violence of armed formations composed almost exclusively of Albanians, Pristina, contrary to the will of the Serbs, called and held elections in these 4 municipalities. For clear and justified reason, the Serbs boycotted these elections. More than 97% of the inhabitants of the north of Kosovo and Metohija are Serbs, so only 0.029% of the total number of Serbs and only slightly more than 3% of the total number of registered voters turned out for these so-called elections. The elections were held in completely undemocratic conditions and illegitimate Albanian mayors, forcibly occupied local self-governments with the help of heavily armored personnel of the alleged special police, that is, members of very well-equipped Albanian armed formations. This was followed by the removal of the symbols of Serbia and displaying the designations of the so-called Kosovo. Serbs who until then worked in local self-governments were forbidden to access their workplaces, and the municipal facilities themselves were fenced off and surrounded by barbed wire. Such a situation led to peaceful protests by Serbs, to which Albanian armed groups responded by injuring more than 50 Serbs on 29th of May alone. In that course of events, there was also tragic and reprehensible wounding of KFOR personal members that, for reasons incomprehensible to us, intentionally or unintentionally practically enabled the realization of Albin Kurti's goals. In those events, 4 Serbs were wounded from firearms, and 1 participant of the protest, Dragiša Galjak, was shot in the back from the automatic weapons. As we have already mentioned, no members of Prishtina's armed formations were processed for this violence against the Serbs. After the respective developments, the US Secretary of State, the EU High Representative Borrell, and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, as well as almost all international officials, were clearly and directly accusing Pristina of escalation in the ground. No doubt that was done by Russian, Chinese, and all the other officials that have never recognized Kosovo's independence. In spite of that, at the European Political Community meeting in Chisinau, I was asked to call the Serbs to sign the petition for replacement of Albanian mayors in Serb-majority municipalities in the north by President Macron and Chancellor Scholz. I told them not to push Serbs, who were under brutal repression, to sign the petition and not to humiliate them by them. I told them that the respective position made no sense because it is obvious that nobody anywhere in Europe can be legally and legitimately in power if elected with 3% of votes of total numbers of voters. In this case, this is how Albanians were elected in environments where Serbs make 97% of population. Unfortunately, nobody wanted to listen to that and help ending Kurti's crimes. Instead of asking unconditional de-escalation from Pristina, they asked Serbs to unconditionally take part in new elections that Kurti had no intention of organizing and enabling. Additionally, they asked Serbia to lower the level of combat alert of armed forces and reduce the number of soldiers close to administrative line to the usual level without being previously informed that in that moment there were even less Serbian soldiers than it usually was the case. We had almost immediately met the requests, while Pristina was allegedly sanctioned with the introduction of measures under which it is being equipped by modern weapons by those who imposed measures against it. In the first place, when we asked which international legal document envisages existence of any other armed formation in Kosovo and Metohija apart from KFOR, and according to which document they supply those illegal Albanian formations with weapons, the answer we get is that those who do the respective are powerful, that they recognize the so-called independence of Kosovo, that they do not care about the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 and the UN Charter, and that they can do whatever they please. Those who are supplying weapons to illegal armed formation of Kosovo Albanians do not stop talking about the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We don't mind that. But we do mind that in the place it is only the territorial integrity of the Republic of Serbia and Kosovo and Metohija that is not respected and that is being undermined and violated, and the respective is explicitly guaranteed by the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 and the UN Charter. Due to all the aforementioned, it is logical that many months of Belgrade's efforts to find a solution to this problem in cooperation with the international community were not fruitful. Although it is a fact that the international community marked Pristina as the sole culprit for this escalation, Pristina basically did not face serious consequences for its actions. But the terror against the Serbian population has intensified, which includes, among other things, physical attacks on Serbs, the shutdown of their institutions and attacks on their property and the private property of the Serbian Orthodox Church. This is quantitatively confirmed by the data that in 2023, 179 ethnically motivated attacks on Serbs were recorded, while as many as 21 such attacks have already been recorded since the beginning of this year. This is a case of institutionalized physical and structural violence, which is accompanied by the incursions of Albanian armed groups into institutions financed by the Republic of Serbia and their shutdown, attacks on shipments of money intended for the payment of salaries, pensions, scholarships, and social benefits, then by arrests and harassment of healthcare and postal workers, who in a lawful and the same way as in the previous quarter of a century transparently try to deliver money to those whom it belongs, and also by many other acts of violence. I particularly emphasize that Pristina is viewing armed formations more and more openly and recklessly in carrying out the persecution of Serbs. Those formations are composed exclusively of Kosovo Albanians, and their existence on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija is undeniably illegal and contrary to the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. Since November 2022, various such armed formations have used illegal and disproportionate force against the Serbian population 98 times. of which 83 times in the area of the north of Kosovo and Metohija. Using the mechanisms of provisional institutions in the period since November 2022, they carried out 38 incursions into the north of Kosovo and Metohija, and with the illegal expropriation of land privately owned by Serbs and Serbian Orthodox Church, established a continuous presence in this area where Serbs make more than 97% of the population. Those armed groups also carry out arbitrary arrests of prominent Serbian individuals in that region and other known forms of physical and institutional violence against the Serbian population. Among other things, they carry out acts of mass intimidation of the Serbian population through, number one, obstructing the freedom of movement of Serbs through reasonless stops, humiliating treatment, beatings, and even other violent acts at illegally established armed checkpoints and all other locations in the entire north. Two, unjustifiably opening fire and the almost constant presence of armored fighting vehicles in peaceful urban areas. Three, illegal expropriation of land privately owned by Serbs, which they then used to build new military facilities in that area. Four, adopting decisions on confiscation of buildings owned by Serbian institutions which have been the owners of those facilities for more than 1 century. Five, the violent seizure of the property of the Serbian Orthodox Church, thus violating the special protection zones around the Serbian Orthodox Church facilities. Six, plowing and destruction of Serbian cemeteries. Seven, the imposition of an illegal embargo on Serbian goods and confiscation of legal goods owned by Serbian traders. Unfortunately, the list of illegal activities does not end there, and it is much longer when actions against Serbs in all other areas of Kosovo and Metohija, which they still inhabit, are included. As a reminder, according to Resolution 1244, armed groups of Albanians had to be demilitarized according to paragraph 9b, paragraph 15, and article 6, annex 1 of the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, which implies a ban on their reformation in one form or another. Providing them with modern military equipment is undoubtedly contrary to that resolution. The violence and persecution that Pristina is now openly carrying out against Serbs is a natural part of the long-term systematic and widespread attack on the Serbian civilian population throughout Kosovo and Metohija. In the past year alone, obviously due to the described physical and structural violence of Pristina institutions towards the Serbian population, more than 14% of Serbs left Kosovo and Metohija. It is tragic that Pristina is carrying out the aforementioned actions while at the same time, with the mediation of the EU, the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina has been in progress for many years, which the United Nations General Assembly in a resolution from 2010 designated as an instrument for strengthening security and cooperation, progress on the path to the EU, and improvement of people's lives. Its basic formal scope is certainly the first agreement of principles governing the normalization of relations dated 19th of April 2013, which obliged Pristina to establish the community of Serbian municipalities. Its formation in accordance with the agreement from 2013 and 2015, which Pristina persistently refuses to implement, would create an atmosphere in which Serbs would have at least a chance for a dignified life and protection from persecution and violence. That is why, in the conditions of the ongoing persecution of Serbs, it became quite clear why Pristina refused to fulfill the obligation to form the community of Serb municipalities. Instead of creating conditions for the survival of Serbs in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, we are witnessing well-planned, systematic, and widespread measures that deliberately create unbearable living conditions and persecute Serbs, thus rendering the physical survival of the Serb population on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija impossible. And what we speak about here is not about wonky dialogue, but full legalism from Pristina's side. The current situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija is of such nature that it undoubtedly leads to the deterioration of the situation, international friction, and the emergence of disputes that pose a threat to international peace and security, since the political leadership of the Kosovo Albanians carries out systematic and widespread attacks against the Serbian population. In order to respond in advance to today's already inappropriate calls for restraint and responsibility by both parties, which unfortunately has become a kind of mantra in the statements of international actors on the situation in Kosovo and Metohija, it seems necessary to point to the policy of the Republic of Serbia, which is based on UN Charter, and when it comes to the situation on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, on the strict respect for the resolutions of the Security Council. Serbia opposes all factors of instability and strives to be a solid pillar of stability in the Western Balkans region. For years, Serbia has been attracting record amounts of foreign direct investments, greater than the rest of the region's countries combined. Serbia's development plans are very ambitious. In 2027, we will host the Expo exhibition having a particular impact on the development strategy, which has been worked out in detail throughout, planned with a colorful name, Leap into the Future. The very fact that Serbia, as a responsible country and a constructive international actor, addressed the UN Security Council, refraining so far from any unilateral response to the actions of Pristina. I believe that it is not in anyone's interest that in a world where too many hotspots have already been opened, the Balkans will once again become a zone of instability due to the blind and senseless hatred of the Pristina regime towards the Serbs living in Kosovo and Metohija. I hope that after today's meeting, even those members of the UN Security Council who recognize the illegal unilaterally declared independence of the southern Serbian province will understand that Pristina's latest moves are not just an attempt to consolidate something that a significant majority of UN members, including Serbia, do not recognize as a state, but to endanger and violate the peace. Pristina's attempt to implement the abolition of dinar payment transactions and remove the dinar as a means of payment is nothing more than another in a series of acts of persecution and a systematic and widespread attack on the Serbian population in one word, a crime against humanity. I also take this opportunity to thank to all of the officials from the United States and EU and all our traditional friends from the East for reacting to Pristina's latest escalating moves with statements of condemnation. However, the recent seizure in Pristina of money intended for pensions and social benefits for Serbs, as well as the arrest and criminal prosecution of people who transferred that money in a completely transparent and legal manner, as in all years during the past quarter of century, irrefutably proves that the statements given were clearly not enough means to persuade Pristina to immediately end the persecution of the Serbs and turn away from attempts to destabilize the region. I'm not even sure that the request of certain international actors to postpone the implementation of the regulation is the right way, because in that way Pristina is actually indirectly encouraged to continue making unilateral decisions with the technical procedural requirement that it just be more careful in choosing the moment and the manner of implementing those unilateral moves. The solution to this crisis, as well as to all other crises that Pristina has produced in the past period, can only be a clear order to immediately stop all the mentioned measures which deliberately create unbearable living conditions and carry out the persecution of Serbs, as well as decisive discouragement and preventing Pristina from resorting to any unilateral moves in the future concerning the Serbian people in Kosovo and Metohija. In this context, we ask the Security Council not to lose sight of the fact that in 2022 the Republic of Serbia, due to the described threat to the safety and survival of Serbs by armed Albanian formations, sent a request to the commander of KFOR that in accordance with Resolution 1244 and the military technical agreement from Kumanovo, enabled the return of the agreed number of Serbian security personnel who would assist international forces in protecting the Serbian population. Although the aforementioned international legal documents clearly provide for the obligation of the KFOR commander to enable such a return, this did not happen. The Republic of Serbia therefore calls on the Security Council, international organizations and countries that can influence the resolution of the crisis to take urgent and decisive measures with the aim of normalizing the situation in Kosovo and Metohija, preventing further persecution of Serbs, and creating conditions for the resumption of a meaningful dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina in accordance with the UN Charter and UN Security Council resolutions 1160, 1199, 1203, 1239, and 1244. The Republic of Serbia, for its part, will implement all agreements and undertake all necessary measures in accordance with the UN Charter and relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council. In closing, I want to thank all of you, dear representatives of the Security Council members, particularly those countries who strictly observe the UN Charter and the principles that international law is founded on, as well as all of you who showed readiness to listen to me and hear what Serbia has to say regarding the issue of Kosovo and Metohija and the necessity of protection of Serbian people from persecution carried out by provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina, which may bring to irreparable harm and that all of us together must avoid in the interest of preservation of life, peace, and stability. Thank you, Madam President, once again.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Vuçiqit, for his statement, and I now give the floor to Mr. Albin Kurti.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council. There is a deep and uncomfortable irony and, frankly, a dystopian feeling in responding to false allegations of human rights abuses made by a country known to have committed the last genocide of the 20th century, and a government that is currently one of the biggest authoritarian threats to regional peace and security. This very Security Council established the ICTY in 1993 because of horrific crimes and grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. The Serbian government throughout the 90s ordered, planned, and committed murder, torture, mutilation, and rape, committing genocide in Srebrenica and in Kosovo. Feminist legal scholars have extensively shown how rape was used as a tool of war. The brutality of what was committed changed international human rights law forever. Out of this misery, Kosovo emerged from the war as a symbol of the fight for dignity and the triumph of human rights. And we did not grow bitter. We have built ourselves into a forward-facing, multicultural and multi-ethnic republic, and a growing and robust democratic state. 16 years after independence and a quarter century after war and devastation, today we stand tall and proud. A republic for all, a multi-ethnic society of all. Our government's dedication to democracy, rule of law, and human rights has bolstered both our economy and internal unity. Since the NATO intervention, we've actively engaged with numerous international allies to establish democratic and efficient institutions. In the last 3 years, our economy has surged, with 6.2% average growth, doubled foreign direct investments and exports, and a 2/3 rise in tax revenues without substantial fiscal policy change. We've funneled this growth into the region's largest fiscal package, recognized by the World Bank, to directly aid citizens, families, and businesses in facing global energy and cost of living challenges. Kosovo is a success story of NATO intervention in the spring of 1999, and an inspiring lesson on how economic development and democratic progress can go hand in hand. This progress has been recognized by a number of international organizations. The 2023 Freedom House report ranks Kosovo first in the Western Balkans, second in Europe, and third globally for advancements in political rights and civil liberties. We improved by 22 places in just 2 years in the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index. Similarly, we jumped 21 places in the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index since our government took office. Our growth and well-being are shared with minorities. We proudly have and enforce one of the constitutions with the highest protections of minority rights, which include 20 guaranteed seats in the parliament, out of 120, out of which 10 are for Serbs. For perspective, the entire population of Kosovo is approximately 1.8 million, and the Serbian community is about 4% of it. Serbs in Kosovo also run 10 out of 38 municipalities, so over 25% of them. We have made sure to allocate a substantial part of our budget to them and made sure that the Serbian language is an official language everywhere. We're actively working with the help of international governments and international NGOs to bolster these rights. Just last year, the Ministry for Communities and Returns, led by an ethnic Serb minister, allocated millions for 265 grants to NGOs, farmers, and small businesses from non-majority communities. The majority of these funds went to Kosovo Serbs. This month, we're launching a new initiative to support employment for up to 2,000 residents of the 4 northern municipalities. This effort will be facilitated by our newly established Employment Agency Office at the municipality of Leposavić, a Serbian majority municipality. The Ministry of Finance Kosovo's Generation Unlimited program provides paid internships for youth, awarded also to the Kosovo Serb youth. Our energy efficiency program subsidizes energy-efficient home heating equipment, with 17% of subsidies benefiting non-majority communities, including Kosovo Serbs. We've allocated funds for building and repairing homes in Serb communities and provided an additional 5.6 million euros to Serb majority municipalities this year. Education grants for these municipalities are over 20% higher per student compared to others. In the period of 2008-2022, the 10 Serb majority municipalities enjoyed, on average, a 62% larger budget per capita than the rest of Kosovo. And for 2024, the Ministry for Communities and Returns has the largest budget increase of all ministries, apart from the Ministry for Culture, Youth and Sports, which has the investment for the Mediterranean Games 2030. The Office of Prime Minister press releases are in Albanian and in Serbian language all of the time. In addition, government meetings are also live streamed both in Albanian and Serbian. The idea that Kosovo is conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign or prosecution against the Serb community is a lie, one that has been debunked by numerous public bodies. Last October, the European Parliament approved a resolution calling on Serbian authorities and media to refrain from hate speech against Kosovars and the dissemination of propaganda about ethnic cleansing and pogroms in Kosovo. Last year, the Helsinki Committee for Human Rights detailed how the Serbian government intentionally spreads fear regarding the false endangerment of Serbs in Kosovo in order to radicalize society and to create a toxic atmosphere in which an agreement with Kosovo would be rejected. The false claims have also been disproven by the European Stability Initiative, a think tank based in Berlin and Vienna that obtained documents directly from official Serbian institutions. Their official statistics on state health insurance, enrollments in schools, pension recipients, the birth rates in hospitals prove that the percentage of Serbs leaving Kosovo corresponds to that of those leaving Serbia. Therefore, Serbs who leave Kosovo, just as those who leave Serbia, do so to pursue opportunities in Western Europe, not to flee some fictional ethnic cleansing campaign. Instead, let's focus on Serbia's treatment of its ethnic Albanian population today, an ethnic cleansing campaign carried out administratively. The Serbian government has systematically removed over 4,200 ethnic Albanians from the civil registry in Medveđa and over 2,000 in Bujanos. This erasure has tangible consequences. Victims lose access to IDs, passports, medical services, social assistance, vehicle registration, property transactions, pensions, and voting rights, leaving them stateless. This discriminatory targeting constitutes a method of depopulation against the Albanian community in Serbia. Ethnic Albanian citizens are far from being the only target of Serbia's authoritarian regime. On the 2nd of January of this year, The Guardian's editorial board described the state of politics there as state capture. A few hours ago, the European Parliament adopted with overwhelming majority a resolution calling for an investigation into the elections held in December, citing manipulating results, aggressive rhetoric, verbal abuse, and Russian media actively engaging in disinformation on behalf of the government. Serbia has aligned itself with Russia. It is the only European country, except for Belarus, not to impose sanctions following Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And it acts as the Kremlin Trojan horse in southeastern Europe in a geopolitical war against the democratic world. When I was a political prisoner in Serbia at the age of 24 for 2 years and 7 months, I heard the guards loudly expressing joy and euphoria one day. It was September 11, 2001. Sadly, that violent anti-democratic sentiment prevails, and mafia, authoritarianism, and glorification of torture reigns supreme. I now turn to the Central Bank of Kosovo's recent regulation on cash operations, which entered into force on February 1st. Let me be absolutely clear. The regulation does nothing to prohibit or prevent the government of Serbia from providing financial support to Kosovo Serbs. Any suggestion to the contrary is nothing more than false propaganda aimed at inciting ethnic tensions. The regulation seeks merely to ensure the transparency and legality of cash imported into Kosovo in line with both our constitution and European Union monetary policy. The very same rules apply to all cash imports from any country in any currency. They do not ban transfers of dinars from Serbia any more than they ban transfers of dollars from US, pounds from UK, or for that matter, lek from Albania. The Central Bank of Kosovo is committed to doing all that it can to ensure that Kosovo Serbs are able to continue receiving financial support from Serbia uninterrupted and unimpeded. It has sent a letter to its counterpart, the National Bank of Serbia, proposing an agreement on the transfer of funds through legal and transparent means in full compliance with the new regulation. And our government is fully committed to ensure a smooth transition with sufficient time invested in education and information instead of imposing penalties for non-compliance. We are committed to jointly identify and promote the best available tools to ensure a continuation of financial transfers from Serbia towards legal municipalities or households. The Central Bank's regulation seeks not to harm any single group of citizens, but rather to protect all citizens of every ethnic community from the threats of organized crime, arms trafficking, and money laundering. All of these activities rely on the ability of criminal groups to receive illegally smuggled cash, largely across our border with Serbia. Citizens in the north of Kosovo, the overwhelming majority of whom are ethnic Serbs, are threatened day in and day out by such groups. Our Serb citizens face intimidation from criminal groups dictating their actions from protesting to voting. Disobedience results in violence, car burnings, and threats to family members. When Kosovo Serbs ask to meet with me, we cannot make the meetings public because their lives and livelihoods are threatened. This must stop. Belgrade cannot be permitted endlessly to finance its criminals and terrorists in Kosovo with undeclared and unregulated streams of money flowing freely and illegally into our country. And that, distinguished members of Security Council, is the real source of Belgrade's hysteria over the Central Bank's regulation. Belgrade has sounded the alarm not because of dinar exchange into euro, but because we are banning large sacks of money at the border. They are crying foul not out of concern for the plight of Kosovo Serb citizens, but because their convenient pipeline of illegal cash into the north of Kosovo is about to be shut off. This gathering and the propaganda and vitriol that has preceded it is nothing more than part of a ruthless campaign by an authoritarian regime. The Republic of Kosovo is fortunate to enjoy broad support from its international partners and allies in its fight against organized crime and corruption. The Central Bank and its regulations are just as essential to that fight as police, officers, prosecutors, and judges. In some ways, we are not surprised that Serbia would create problems out of democratic procedure. Since the end of the war, the Serbian government, run by many of the people who held senior positions in the Milosevic government, including Mr. Vuçiqit, Milosevic's information propaganda minister, has mustered all its power and imagination to find new ways to terrorize Kosovo. Unsurprisingly, Serbia not only promotes genocide denialism, but also violently enforces it. After Serbian opposition leader Nikola Sandulovic apologized for Serbia's war crimes in Kosovo and laid flowers on the grave of a 7-year-old victim, the Serbian Secret Service arrested him early this January and beat him until he was unconscious, leaving him paralyzed. Meanwhile, Kosovo-Serbian journalist Radomir Dimic, who has resided in Serbia, has publicly stated that he plans to return to Kosovo because Mr. Vučic's authoritarian regime has made life unbearable for journalists. And as we speak now, he has arrived in Kosovo. Sadly, even 25 years after the war, Serbia persists in its attempts to violently reclaim Kosovo. A glaring instance of this occurred on September 24th last year. Around 80 paramilitary troops, organized and supported by Serbia, launched an unprovoked attack on a Kosovo police patrol, resulting in the death of one police sergeant, Afrim Bunjaku, and injuries of 2 others. Despite the terrorist attempt to use innocent Serbian pilgrims as human shield in a monastery aiming to exploit any casualties for anti-Kosovo propaganda, our police forces' professionalism averted civilian casualties. Then, on September 27, Serbia declared an official 3-day mourning period for the terrorists killed in the Kosovo police anti-terror operation. And you notice today that Mr. Vučić was recalling several Serbs being wounded or injured in different incidents, but he did not mention 3 killed Serbs. Why he did not mention them? Because he knows that they were terrorists which were financed, supported, orchestrated by him. That's why the 3 killed Serbs were not mentioned at all. And on September 29th, the White House National Security Council drew the world's attention to an unprecedented deployment of Serbian tanks, troops, and heavy artillery along the Kosovo-Serbia border. Only after US and other international pressure did Serbia finally draw down its forces. Meanwhile, Kosovo police discovered a disturbing set of documents left behind by the terrorists in their hasty retreat back to Serbia. The documents show that the September 24 attack had been part of a larger plan to violently annex the north of Kosovo via a coordinated assault on 37 distinct positions. A corridor was then to be established to enable a continuous supply of arms and troops from Serbia. In the subsequent months, Serbia has rejected international calls to extradite the terrorists to Kosovo or otherwise hold them accountable. The paramilitary leader of the September 24th attack, Milan Radojic, the US and UK sanctioned former vice president of the Belgrade-sponsored political party in Kosovo, Lista Srpska, still roams free in Serbia, just as Serbia itself has thus far escaped international sanctions for its role in the attack. Radojic has an outstanding arrest warrant by Interpol that was issued this past December and that Serbia has ignored. This impunity is both unacceptable and dangerous. As President Biden stated in October of last year, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going. These are wise words. Serbia must be held to account for its terror and aggression. Otherwise, it will keep going. Serbia's increasingly alarming acts of aggression and terrorism make it all the more urgent that it fulfill its obligations under the basic agreement reached between our countries on February 27 of last year. The agreement was facilitated by the European Union and reflects Europe's renewed engagement in resolving the main dispute between Kosovo and Serbia. It has also been endorsed as legally binding by the United States. The European Union's obligation in the dialogue emanate from UN General Assembly Resolution 64/298. Accordingly, on May 12 of last year, the EU notified the Secretary General that an agreement between Kosovo and Serbia had been reached. The next logical step would be for the EU to formally register that agreement with the United Nations. The basic agreement sets a benchmark of de facto recognition based on the 1972 Basic Treaty between the East and West Germany. The agreement's text expressly invokes the UN Charter as the guiding light governing the relations between our countries. it imposes on parties a number of obligations, including to develop good neighborly relations as specified in Article 1, to engage with one another on the basis of sovereign equality and to respect one another's territorial integrity as specified in Article 2, to refrain from the threat or use of force as specified in Article 3, and Serbia's obligation not to object to Kosovo's membership in any international organizations as specified in Article 4. The chief innovation of the agreement is to elevate de facto relations between our countries to the level of sovereign equals beyond the mere recognition of documents, symbols, and institutions, and a minor upgrade of liaison officers. Unfortunately, nearly a year after the agreement was reached, Serbia seems to be suffering from a severe case of buyer's remorse. Its Prime Minister, Madam Ana Brnabić, sent a letter to the EU on December 13, stating that the agreement isn't legally binding. Serbia also rejects two key obligations: not to object to Kosovo's international membership and not to respect its territorial integrity. This refusal, particularly the later, suggests a willingness to retain the option of invading Kosovo. Against this background, signing the agreement is not a mere formality. It's the only guarantee for its full and unconditional implementation, Kosovo's national security and regional peace. Despite my repeated offers, Mr. Vuçiqit has refused to sign. I invite him, present at this meeting, to sign here and now, emphasizing the UN Charter's crucial role in our agreement and relations. The symbolic act would demonstrate his commitment to peaceful and neighborly relations with Kosovo. Kosovo is primarily known worldwide for the massacres and ethnic cleansing under the Milosevic regime. But few realize this was just the latest chapter in a century-long history of state crimes against Kosovar Albanians, starting with Ilija Garashinin in 19th century. Leading Serbian figures devised 24 plans for the deportation or extermination of Kosovo Albanians. Our people's history represents one of the greatest, yet internationally unrecognized, anti-colonial struggles of the 20th century. While the genocide in the 90s marked a climax, our oppression began long before and resonates with citizens across many nations. Acknowledging the painful history of oppression and violence endured by our people, we are committed to safeguarding the rights of all individuals. Our past experiences have instilled in us a profound desire to create a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. As a nation that has overcome immense adversity, we aspire to serve as a beacon of solidarity and respect for human rights. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Kurti for his statement, and I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Madam President. We are grateful to the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Caroline Ziad, for her briefing on the situation in Kosovo and the information she provided us with. We welcome the participation in our meeting today of the President of Serbia, Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, and we listened to what was said by Mr. Kurti. We are grateful to the Presidency of Guyana for expeditiously convening the request of Serbia and Russia of a Security Council meeting on Kosovo. Unfortunately, in addition to the hotspot in Gaza, out of which Israel is trying to do everything to push out Palestinians from, we are currently witnessing the additional risk of adding one more on the Balkans, where a similar situation, similar facts on the ground are being created by the Kosovo authorities against the ethnic Serbs. And Mr. Kurti has just called them, in this room, he had just called them criminals and terrorists. The problem has reached such a scale that the Serbian population of the Kosovo province is now witnessing a direct threat to their physical survival. In their attempt to try and have a total control over Kosovo and get rid of the non-Albanian population, the authorities in Pristina organized a true anti-Serbian terror. And the goal here is obvious: to create an impossible conditions for the life of the Kosovo Serbs, to make sure that they leave their homes forever. And let me be frank, under the very noses of our American and European colleagues who indulge Pristina, today in Kosovo, in Metohija, we're witnessing a policy which gives rise to blood-curdling associations with a very real ethnic cleansing, and which the Western self-proclaimed advocates of universal human rights are doing their best to ignore. They're being used many ways at the same time to chase away the citizens which are not favored by the Kosovo regime. For example, the harmful activity of Pristina proxies in the 4 municipalities continues. There's continued embargo on the Serbian goods. As a result, over this year, as we just heard from Mr. Vuçiqit, more than 40% of Serbs left the province. The immediate cause for the convening of the meeting today was the illegal decision made by Pristina to ban the circulation of the Serbian dinar in the province. This is a criminal and deceitful step, and this makes the life of ordinary citizens basically unbearable, because about 100,000 non-Albanians risk being left with their pensions, scholarships, and salaries. Not to mention the fact that the functioning of humanitarian institutions is at risk, and this includes kindergartens, hospitals, schools, companies, factories. This is not an economic. This is a true political and discriminatory measure which undermines all efforts made by the international community to find compromises and lasting solutions in a dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. As a result, what we have is a direct risk that there will be a new outbreak of violence in the Balkans. We are convinced that under these conditions, the Security Council must rein in the Kosovo leaders who are trying to, without any justification for that, turn the dialogue with Belgrade into a tool for settling a status issue, contrary to the provisions of Security Council Resolutions 2044, which confirms the sovereignty of Serbia over Kosovo and Metohija. Madam President, the atmosphere of hatred, which is at a critically high level in Kosovo, is being expressed in hostile rhetoric and intimidation on the part of Pristina special forces. Regular attacks against Serbs, their property, is systematic acts of vandalism against Orthodox sacred places. There are gross violations of the electoral rights of non-Albanian citizens, their properties being illegally expropriated. Serbian companies and administrative municipal structures are being drawn down by force. A heightening of psychological pressure is taking place. For example, in 2023 alone, 178 ethnically motivated attacks against Serbs and their property were committed. There's a campaign now to usurp and albanize the Serbian cultural heritage. The history of Kosovo and Metohija is being rewritten. Churches are being taken over. Old Orthodox places of worship are being named Catholic. And the traces of long presence of Serbs on that land are being erased. In December last year, for example, Pristina, once again without any consultations with the Serbian Orthodox Church, named 2 Middle Eastern Orthodox churches in the North Catholic and started their supposedly repairs. Another egregious instance was this January. The Kosovo Albanians organized a hostile takeover of the Hostan, Our Lady of Hostan Monastery of 13th century on the west of the province. Another shocking thing is a consistent stance by the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina to sabotage the implementation of their key and essentially the only commitment they undertook almost 11 years ago in the course of the dialogue with Serbia, conducted with EU mediation. I refer to the commitment by Pristina to create within Kosovo and Metohija of a community of Serb majority municipalities. This mechanism, which is stated in Brussels agreements, was created as a bridge for cooperation, building trust amongst ordinary people between the Serbian and Albanian peoples, and also as a necessary institutional barrier against attempts to discriminate against Serbs and persecute them. It is also very difficult not to notice that in Kosovo there's a domination of Kosovo armed groups. They're dominated by Kosovo Albanians, and their very existence is a violation of Resolution 1244. In line with the resolution, these groups have to be demilitarized, which means that there is a ban on their being reconstituted in any way, shape, or form. In actual fact, what we're seeing in the province is true lawlessness. Serbs are being deprived of their legal right to vote at the Serbian referendum and elections in 2023. They're prosecuted and their crimes against humanity. There's a widespread arbitrary arrests of prominent Serbians and mass intimidation and physical and institutional violence against Serbs. President of Serbia today told us in detail about all of that. Let me just add that the scale of this lawlessness is staggering. It's hard to believe that this is happening in this day and age at the very heart of Europe. It is even more striking when you realize that people in Washington and Brussels are looking at it absolutely calmly and pretending that nothing terrible is taking place. The European Union, instead of demanding that there be a settlement within existing international legal frameworks, which were approved and confirmed by themselves, is blackmailing Belgrade and is talking about introducing into the Serbian negotiating dossier the oral agreements reached with Pristina in February-March 2023 and is trying to make them legally binding. At the same time, the Brussels agreements themselves are completely ignored. In other words, the words uttered by Brussels are nothing but an empty sound. It is a very good illustration of how it's impossible to negotiate with the European Union today, how they failed as a mediator between Belgrade and Pristina. At the same time, Serbia sees placed upon itself dishonest and unjust demands to recognize Kosovo and agree to its membership in multilateral entities, including the UN. And at the same time, the West is moving towards accepting the province into the Council of Europe. It's unprecedented where a candidate is not a state. In other words, the so-called rules-based order is being put to full use by the West, trampling international law in the process. Madam President, in order to understand how we can have lasting peace on the Serbian land, we need to recall the true reason for the current dramatic events. And the reason for that is the aggression by NATO against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. In March, it will be 25 years since the beginning of inhuman destruction by the Americans and their allies of peaceful citizens in the very heart of Europe. The so-called advocates of democracy started bombing the country using depleted uranium, and this resulted in mass casualties amongst peaceful citizens and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Catastrophic damage was also done against the environment. And this is something that NATO will be cursed by 60 future generations of people who will have health issues because of the crimes committed by Washington, crimes which the former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright called collateral damage. Today, Washington and its satellites continue actively supporting the aggressive stance by Kosovo Albanians against Serbs. The United States, one of the founding members of the UN and a permanent member of the Security Council, are even publicly and officially talking about the intent to violate these resolutions. For example, the Pentagon is loudly and clearly saying that it's planning to give Pristina 24 anti-tank Javelin missiles and 246 munitions for it. This is a provocative step and will be a gross violation of Security Council Resolution 1244. Inspired by Washington, Kosovo Albanians today are already openly saying that Kosovo, as it exists today, is just a, and I quote, a temporary project towards unification with Albania, end of quote. At the same time, they are announcing a rearming of the Kosovo so-called policemen and introducing by 2028 a mandatory military service in the province. As we all know, such steps within the framework of the transforming the so-called Kosovo security forces into an army would also be a violation of Security Council Resolution 1244. We must state here that in addition to what I said just now, we also have our own questions to what is being done by Pristina. But we think it would be more appropriate to discuss them in the course of the April meeting of Security Council on the activity of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo. The work done by this mission is very much needed under these difficult conditions, and this means that they need to keep or probably increase their personnel and funding. We call upon Security Council members to take urgent measures to protect the Kosovo Serbs and demand that Pristina stop their persecution, including ending all discriminatory measures against them. We are convinced that the only way to having peace on Serbian land lies through developing a sustainable and mutually acceptable international legal solution between Belgrade and Pristina on the basis of Security Council Resolution 1244. Such a solution should meet the interests of Belgrade and the Serbian people and be approved by the UN Security Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian